Yeah, so it seems that this conference is more like a full flower bouquet, and I will present about ketamine the same kind of tour de force through a lot of different aspects, but I will focus at the end on the psychedelic effects of ketamine and why you should believe in them and why you shouldn't.
I'd hold it and just talk into it, it's probably easier.
Directly. It's better that way? Yeah. Okay. So it's not very good for me, but however. Okay, so you have already heard some stuff about ketamine, which is, it was developed as a less toxic alternative to PCP or angel dust drug known. And Edward Domino, who was involved in that development, called that kind of anesthesia you get from ketamine and PCP dissociative anesthesia because it leads to a functional disconnection of the thalamocortical and the limbic systems. Breathing and vital functions are still intact under its influence, which is quite a difference to the usual anesthetics. And it was much used in the Vietnam War as well as for animals. And you will see a picture here. So they call it a primate immobilizing agent. And that's still the case in humans if they go to the K-hole, right? Okay, so the psychological effects are very broad. It gives you usually euphoria, some kind of omnipotence feelings, as well as megalomania. A major effect on a psychological level as well as on the neurophysiological level is the dissociation from body, or the experience of the body, the feelings of the body, as well as pain and emotions. So that's not really a psychedelic drug in that sense. Usually you're more connected to your emotions. Often appears a feeling of floating or being out of the body. It's more floating than out of the body, if you ask me. And there is serious thought disorder, which may disappear if you have used it quite a lot of times. And there is most prominent strange dreamlike imagery as well as synesthesias. There are no real hallucinations in that sense, but a lot of mental imagery which kind of come near to hallucinations. There's also a significant altered time-space sense and impaired memory, impaired learning, and impaired attention. So I'm going down now to the data sets which we have generated with clinical work with ketamine, but I have to first introduce you to these right now well-used questionnaire, which is the APZ questionnaire. It has 5 dimensions. I just want to very shortly go into it. So the first dimension is oceanic boundlessness. So the people feel positive, the body borders are not there anymore. They have euphoric feelings. They even may reach a mystical state. That is one dimension. The opposite is the dread of ego dissolution. It means you feel manipulated, you feel losing control, you get anxious because of that, right? So anxious ego dissolution is the other part. Then there's visionary restructuring in that scale, which means you have some kind of vision with closed eyes or with open eyes, it doesn't matter. And there may be also vigilance reduction or a hypnagogic state induced. You can measure that with that subscale. And there may be auditory alterations. So to give you a more kind of visual image, what oceanic boundlessness may mean, you can see that here. It's exactly like on ketamine. So, however, you can also have that anxious ego dissolution thing going on, right? If the experience going that way. But you don't have these kinds of psychedelic visions. The visions or the mental imagery with ketamine is usually very much more primitive than these kind of things as with psilocybin or LSD. So it's more like this kind of, these entoptic phenomena. And also this is from a ketamine artist, so it looks often more like these primitive visuals. So if you look at the effects of ketamine, as you can see here, the oceanic boundlessness, that is the anxious ego dissolution, this is a visionary restructuralization, this is vigilant reduction, and this is auditory alterations. So this is a placebo, right? So nothing happens. With the low dose, you see something is going on. But if you look, for example, at the auditory alterations with the higher dose, which we have used, you get much more. It's kind of 6 times more or something. But what I want to make you aware of is there is a significant oceanic boundlessness, but on the other side, you have these anxious things going on. And what you should really pay attention to is vigilance reduction. So you get a kind of clouding of consciousness, as you can see here. So that's very high, right? With LSD, it's kind of here, right? So that is maybe a disadvantage from a psychedelic point of view in respect to that substance. So now I'm coming to recreational use, just a very short intro to that. So John Lilly and Marcia Moore, she in fact died on ketamine in the winter, somewhere outside, naked, was found weeks later, just as the bones are there. And the Vietnam veterans may have inspired the recreational use of ketamine. And Marcia Moore and John Lilly were the first which have approached that terrain in a more comprehensive sense, even with some not so good consequences. But it was marginal until the 1990s when it showed up in the so-called techno scene. Otherwise, it was just in a very few circles used. Yes, it is used in the dance scene, and this form of use in the dance scenes depends mainly on intranasal use or maybe oral use, where you need much more substance to get the same effects. So you usually use it intranasally. And there is an increased use in the UK, in the US, in Sweden, and in Asia especially. This is why they approach the World Health Organization to schedule it 3 times, by the way. But if you would prohibit ketamine as a clinical agent, as an essential medicine, 30,000 people, it was estimated, will die because you can't treat them in field situation and with accidents and so on. Okay, this is a typical setting. We're on a techno party. But ketamine was also used in psychotherapy as early as 1973 with good success, but these studies were kind of methodologically not really sound. And then Fontana in Argentina, as well as Roque in Mexico, have used that substance, partially together with LSD. And Rick Ingrasky in end-stage cancer patients in 1978. And Hans Karl Leuner, one of my teachers, during the 1980s, we have used it in patients a lot. I don't think that it really works as a psychotherapeutic agent as much, but it may be different with alcoholics and kind of inducing peak experience kind of things. Gustav Hansen published a significant study in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs in 1984 about the psychotherapeutic use of, but without outcome results. And Evgeny Kospitsky was already mentioned, a Russian researcher. So this is a typical therapeutic setting here with Professor Leuner in the center. That guy is really on ketamine. It's a true photo. And now we come to ketamine and depression. It was used in depression because mainly there is a certain misery in respect to the conventional antidepressants medications, which are really not working. All these studies were fraudulently done by the pharmaceutical industry, or most of them, virtually all, to be real. And ketamine's antidepressants effect were discovered by chance, in fact, by some orthopedic doctors which have done conventional anesthetic surgery or using the conventional procedures and found that people were less depressed afterwards. So, but that material has significant side effects. You have to remind yourself that this is an intravenous bolus or a constant infusion, and it really gives you side effects. So in fact, half of the patients reject the second infusion because of these side effects. You mentioned that too, that some people get kind of not good experiences. So short-term effects, as we have already heard, are maybe good for 2 to 3 days, but then you have to repeat that. And the maintenance treatment is really problematic because it can give you all these different side effects which can be serious sometimes. The mechanism of action where the antidepressants effects are coming from may be of interest, and it may lead to new medications. There are already some molecules out there as a kind of replacement for ketamine with less side effects, but nothing came really through. And so here you can see this is a placebo infusion. It gives you some effects too. And this is a ketamine infusion. But look at this here. You know, we are measuring in minutes until the effects are back. You know, at the 3rd day, you're virtually there again. And so we really have to do it repeatedly. And this is from the study of Sarade, which is the most prominent one. And if you look what they are doing with these patients, so this is a so-called ECT department or ECT unit, where they do electroconvulsive therapy. And they reserved one bed here. So these people get electroshock treatment, and there is one person getting an infusion of ketamine. I found this environment quite crude. There's no music, there's nothing else there, so you're lying there and realizing the other depressive people lying beside you getting ECT treatment. However, maybe not the best environment to go to. And if you look at the long-term results, there are just a few out there, but you can see that here. So every dot is a ketamine infusion, right? And you see that the people get kind of resistant about that. And then they give them ECT again, then they give them every 2 days a ketamine infusion. I don't think that's really a good thing to do, right? And you see that the resistance get more and more and more. So we really have to look at the long-term results, especially in respect to side effects and in respect to efficacy. Okay, but that's not what I was doing research on. I have done research on SNR ketamine, or comparing the S-ketamine with the racemic ketamine. To be honest, we have done some experiments in advance of our studies at Hannover Medical School, trying the substance ourselves. It was permitted by the ethics committee, and so we just checked for the right dose. For example, when I was sitting in front of the computer, when we did the first trials, I wasn't doing anything, but I thought I did it. So after 10 minutes, they said to me, "Please push the button." And I said, "I did it all the time." They said, "No, you didn't move." So you can't use such a dose, right? And so therefore, but what we also found is that you get rid of the psychedelic effects if you don't use the racemic ketamine. If you use S-ketamine, it's bad. So a while later, I had the opportunity to meet John Lilly. So I asked him, "What do you think about S-ketamine?" He said, "Oh, bullshit, don't take that stuff as a psychedelic drug." Okay, so we did that study. We didn't inform Park Davis about our intention to prove that the racemic ketamine is a psychedelic ketamine, the other not, but they gave us the money and arranged for that study with us. And so S-ketamine was quite popular. They tried to get the patent longer, but because the racemic patent was out. And so if you look at these studies which have tested the S-enantiomer compared to the R-enantiomer, it's 4 times more potent in anesthetic respect, and the R-enantiomer is less hallucinatory, gives you more relaxation and well-being. And they said the S-enantiomer, so you have in a liquid with organic molecules, you have two molecules. One is the right, how should I say? So you have a racemic mixture usually of the right-driven one and the left-driven one. So they may behave different on receptors, right? Even on metabolic enzymes. And so they thought if we could separate both of them and use just the S-enantiomer, we would have less body load and a better outcome with anesthesia. That was their goal. And it may have much less psychedelic effects. And so what we found it is like, if you want to compare it to a simple analogy, so you have the kind of same effects with S-ketamine, but you don't have the dynamic flow of the psychedelic experience. So if you want, one time you are in a river, going with the river, and the other time you're in a lake. You're stuck there. You get the same thing around you, water, the same psychedelic effects, but it's nothing going on. So it is, in a way, more terrible, we thought. However, we tested that, and what we found is, here you can see, that the S-ketamine is not as much better. It gives you less euphoria a little. It should be half the effects, or maybe not like that, but I mean, you see that there's not much of a difference. And that led us to the conclusion that our instruments, how to measure these responses, were not appropriate because the subjective experience is quite different. Lilly found that, we found that with different persons, and so therefore there should be a larger difference on these measures, but there are not. because the water around is the same, but even with a completely different subjective course of effect. And so we have designed, because we were afraid that we couldn't measure it, so we designed some specific questions ourselves to look at both of these molecules. And as you can see here, the impression to lose control was kind of the same. I felt losing like contact with reality, and that was the same. But in respect to feelings, for example, you find a difference, right? And there was ease to give up into the experience. Yes, some more with the dynamic flow of the experience, right? I couldn't direct my thoughts anymore. This is placebo, right? I guess you read that. I couldn't direct my thoughts anymore. That's also quite a difference. So there are differences which you can't detect with these, in fact, more primitive instruments like the APZ. Okay, that was that thing. And now I'm coming to ketamine and the psychedelic experiences. So I want to go into the way it should be used if you want to get the most out of it in respect to psychedelic experiences. So you should prepare a trustworthy setting. You should be left in that position on a soft mattress. You should use the intramuscular route. There is a certain risk with these injections, not in respect to ketamine, but in respect to infections and not doing it the right way and so on. And be aware, don't use 100 milligrams, which most people recommend. It's not the best way. It's the fact is 70. It's for most people the best thing to go on a psychedelic journey with that material. Relax, don't move, and don't try to go around or something. Pee before. Recline with others if possible. Don't use it alone. We don't recommend that. It's not very dangerous, but it's not effective as much. Use soft music, for example, as Peter Gabriel's Passion, for example. It's true. It's one of the optimal soundtracks for that. And this is how you use it from that bottle. So this is how you may lie around with others. Some people identified me somewhere, but I don't believe so. So if you look at the pharmaco-kinetics of that substance, means how it behaves in the body in respect to plasma levels, you will find, okay, I put that line in as an idealized line to say above that you may get psychedelic effects, below not. And so if you use it intranasal, usually the people don't go over that edge. You can do it, but you see that's not that much. So if it goes to the, also important is the bioavailability. So what's left in the body, in the brain after you metabolized some of it. And it's not much which comes to your brain with that mode of application. If you go to intramuscular, you see there's a much larger space where you are in the so-called psychedelic realm. And the bioavailability is much more, right? So if it comes to oral, it lasts much longer, up to 4 hours. But this thing is not very dynamic and it doesn't give you the real thing as far as we can tell. And this seems to be the most appropriate way to use it in a psychedelic fashion. I remind you, Krupitsky used it that way too, right? Maybe even in a higher dose range. So if it comes down to pharmacokinetics, there's another phenomenon not really discussed in the literature and no studies were done on it. So this is kind of, if you want, anecdotal, but it is empirical. So if you inject one intramuscular dose, here's 60 minutes, and you inject another one, you see that thing grows, and it goes longer because you still have some of the material in the body from the first injection. And if you do it the third time, it's still some more, and you may get a much more longer and intense psychedelic experience after injecting a few times. Don't do it more than 3 times. I don't recommend that, obviously. So, what we also found, was that a wrong recommendation or? No? Yes? However, you wouldn't do it 3 times even, right? Okay, so however, we found another interesting phenomenon which is not much known. It may be known by ketamine users, but we never heard of it. So I called that, because we experienced that repeatedly, the post-escalation trance. So there is a specific state where you get into after the third injection when it goes down, because it's a very slow and long come down, and it gives you quite a different, interesting experience, what we call that way. So, and it is quite a different state of mind. You got less excitement, as you have usually with ketamine. You have a kind of excitement. It is a sympathomimetic drug, like MDMA, not that much, but somewhat. And you are very calm and relaxed. There is a very smooth flow where you are in, and there are no thoughts. So it's a very agreeable state from a certain point of view. And what could be the explanation? There are only hypotheses around. So there could be pharmacodynamic factors. So it may be that the receptors are differently approached by the ketamine and that repeated thing, and that it is for quite a while in your organism. So it may result from that, the receptor activation. And also there is a very complex thing going on in pharmacology, in fact, which the pharmacologists try to ignore. Because it is most easy to measure a plasma level in your blood or a level in a body tissue. You use the blood, right? But it will be distributed throughout the body with heroin and ketamine too. And so it means you have to measure it in every different kind of tissue. The people don't do that because it's much more easy to pick blood. And so we don't know exactly about the processes where when the plasma level is going up, it's just in the plasma, the body tissue goes up later, and then when the blood level is going down, it comes back from the tissues, and from the different tissue, as well muscles, fat, water, and interstitial tissue. So it may be a very complex thing in respect to pharmacokinetics when you have that in your blood and how these redistribution processes are going on. And that may result in that kind of specific state. So accumulating effect and distribution and redistribution may be relevant. And so we are coming now, why I'm to the point why I'm skeptic about the psychedelic effects of ketamine somewhat. It gives you a significant vigilance reduction, 10 times more than with LSD. And clouding of consciousness, as it is called, it gives you usually emotional blunting. The body is not felt. That's also quite different as with the psychedelics, right? The cognition is quite fragmented. Usually you can't really think anymore. I mean, not in the sense that you have no thoughts, as I've claimed before for that specific state. It's more like you're in a chaotic kind of thing going on. You can't think in a coherent way. There are also very much mnestic disturbances. So you usually forget everything afterwards. I wouldn't say everything, but let's say 85, 95%. And so that's also not usual with the other psychedelics. So some people in the German-speaking countries call it a hallucinogenic drug of the second order, which means vigilance reduction, mnestic disturbances, cognition fragmented, as with laughing gas, for example. Phenic imagery is quite rare. You don't have coherent memory emanations from your past or from traumatic events or something like that. Usually not. And that was proven, by the way, this stuff with the studies by Vollenweider and our studies, because the measure of insightfulness is really low with that substance. Proven significantly. And what you also find is the constellation of effects, what you get from ketamine, is very different every time. Very different every time. It means you have sometimes constellation which may give you a psychedelic experience, most times not. And that can be shown in the questionnaire data. It has a very high standard deviation. So everything, it may really give you a different experience every time. Few constellations give psychedelic effects, and it assembles itself in a change pattern, it seems, because of this redistribution and whatever kind of processes. And there is a changing inflow and a changing receptor activation throughout the experience. That is my theory. And it's very much determined by pharmacokinetics. And it has a very short duration. So you're just for a few minutes in that state, or maybe 10 or half an hour or something like that. So if you want to put that in a picture, I try to, it means these are, let's say, parts of the experience. You may know the experiential typewriter by Leary, where they had a typewriting thing where you could put in hallucinations, thoughts, imagery, whatever kind of thing. And so if you think that's the flow of the experience, so this one is kind of diffuse and disordered, as it is usually, I think. But sometimes it can be kind of much more ordered, or maybe even much more disordered in some respects. And another constellation, maybe this one. And sometimes you get very intense mystical religious experiences, and interestingly enough, in these states you are kind of quite awake. They usually appear at the tail end, and they could be symbolized that way, that it is a much more ordered experience, but that's rare. It's more kind of a random thing that you get that under the right circumstances. And so, my last slide, I think. So, other things are, there is no elaboration about the experience during the experience. That's maybe different with mushrooms, with LSD and other long-lasting psychedelics. And it appears there's no real significant carryover effect. It means that you take something from the experience into your life and work on that, or remember that, or do something with it. You can't do that because of the amnesia, the clouding of consciousness, yeah, and the visions are far away from usual consciousness, everyday consciousness, so it's harder to bring them back. And instructive experiences, as you can have on psilocybin and MDMA and LSD, are really rare usually. And they are easily forgotten or written over by the experience which will follow. So you really have to write something down. You're not able to, but you should. And what I came to the conclusion is the analogy or the metaphor that you have a fishnet, which is your mind, and you got the ketamine experience going through your mind, and you see the fishes, you can even touch them, but afterwards you're left with no catch. Okay? So, and in fact, there is no increase of self-knowledge usually, and there is no increase of compassion. As far as I can tell, there's also no increase of appreciating nature, for example. So that's a dissociative drug mainly. And just to give you a slight review about the measurements with other substances, as you can see, this is very high, the vigilance reduction, and the other substances have different features. They as you can see here, right? The visionary stuff is not as much with ketamine, but this was open eyes, right? That's a different deal. And you see with amphetamine, it's all very low. But remember, vigilance reduction, a major factor. And to give you a short synopsis, it is a substance with many uses. It was used in psychotherapy. It is used in depression. There are many mechanisms of action. I wasn't going into that. I had to delete these slides. And there is a very complex pharmaco-kinetics and pharmacodynamics, and some of its effects counteract psychedelic experiences, as far as I see. And you may view it as a fishnet with too wide a mesh and low outcome. Thanks for your attention.